Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Pat Murphy, Head of Environment Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc, and our Signpost webinar series is brought to you in conjunction with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, National Rural Network, and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. This morning, we're delighted to be joined by Françoise Burel from the who is a researcher with the National Centre for Scientific Research. She's based in Brittany, and a lot of our work has been on hedgerows and hedgerow management in Brittany. Françoise, you're really welcome to join us here this morning.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be there.
Okay, and this morning's webinar is kind of the final event of our hedgerow week, and Catherine, this is, I think, our third year of having a hedgerow week. Am I right on that?
Fourth, Pat.
Fourth, okay. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Okay, and I suppose I think looking around the country, our efforts in relation to the management of hedgerows are beginning to pay dividends. You're beginning to see, I think, changes in the way hedgerows are managed. We have a long way to go. In terms of the hedgerow week, you've had a number of events on. You might just give us a kind of a sum up of what's happened during the week.
Yeah, and I would say, as you said, over time, I think what's really changed is the attitude and the interest. It will take time to deliver the management, but you know, there's no comparison to the interest in hedges and for biodiversity and for carbon now. So we certainly have achieved awareness. I think what we want is practice change now. So yeah, and each week does its own little bit. It adds to the conversation and engages people, and so we've had a wide range of events at our, I suppose, the benefit of my working on biodiversity, being part of your team and the bigger Teagasc team, is that like our hedgerow stand was viewed by 2,500 farmers who attended the fantastic open day in Johnstown Castle. They may not have all heard or listened, but they all passed it. They saw that we were taking it seriously. So I think that's mainstreaming at its best. We had a lovely walk in Bishop's Meadow in Kilkenny with Nor Vision and the Heritage Council. So I think emphasising, and I'd love to develop this further, the engagement of the non-farming population, because it's very important that they are giving the right messages to farmers. And we're all singing off the same hymn sheet, as I say. And then yesterday that was taken to its ultimate with an amazing event in Gertrude Agricultural College, where we had contractors, we had people involved in hedgerow organisations, and we had people involved in education and wanting to further the message, all talking from totally different viewpoints. And we had a fantastic discussion, and we had machinery demonstrations with three main focuses. We talked about best practice management of the top hedge, which has started now on the 1st of September with people going out cutting hedges, and the contractor there for the first time in a hedge left a bunch of thorns to grow up into a white thorn tree. If we could do that in every hedge this autumn, it would have, you know, a huge impact, you know, a huge definite impact. So every topped hedge to leave a bunch of thorns. And you know, and the second one then was the hedges that have gone into upside down tallage brush hedges. We demonstrated coppicing those, and my plea for this the acre scheme is to coppice the hedges that are already poor, so that we're not missing out on, you know, the lovely escaped hedges have a huge value in their own right. And then we demonstrated the compostable film on the new hedges, which will obviously be a topic for later, you know, December, January time.
Okay, very good. So a busy week. Françoise, Brittany is a part of the world where we have a lot of association with from Ireland. We associate our farming systems to be very similar and our landscape to be somewhat similar. And I know you have in your presentation, you're outlining, I suppose, some of those similarities and maybe some of the contrasts. But okay, if you want to begin your presentation.
Yes, sure.
So if you want to share your screen there.
Yes, can I start?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, so thank you very much for inviting me to give this webinar. And I am Françoise Burel, and as you said, I am working at the National Centre for Scientific Research in Rennes, and I am a landscape ecologist who devoted the most of her career looking at the relationship between landscape structure and dynamics on biodiversity in agricultural landscapes. And my study sites were mainly hedgerow network landscapes in Brittany and all over the world. One has to know that in France, 2/3 of the hedgerows were removed since the half of the last century, as you can see on these photographs, going from 1950s on the upper left to 2010 on the bottom right. And currently, still 11,500 kilometers of hedgerows disappear each year, while only 3,500 kilometers are planted. Oh, sorry. One has to realize that there is a high diversity of hedgerows all over the world, and those hedgerows differ by the nature of the trees that are present in them. And for example, here you have in Normandy, the hedgerows dominated by oak and chestnut, while in some parts of France, you have hedgerows dominated by salix. And they differ also by the management techniques that are used to manage them. And you have here some hedgerows with high trees, and you have also here, hedgerows with only the shrub layer. When looking at the hedgerow individually, one has to remember that it can be considered as an ecological Tower of Babel, which means that the hedgerow may be used as refuge, site of reproduction, site of feeding site, and hibernation site. And this means that a lot of plants and animals can use the hedgerow during all or only part of their life cycle. And this is due to the diversity of sites that are present in hedgerows, from ditch, bank, herbaceous layer, shrub layer, tree layer, microhabitats for its rocks and roots, and most of the time, the presence of the grassy strips adjacent to the hedgerow. So all these different habitats concentrated in hedgerows permit to offer different habitats to a lot of different species. Those plant species are from diverse origins, and when a hedgerow is bordered by crops, weeds can colonize hedgerows. From when it's bordered by a woodland forest species, colonize hedgerows, and when it's bordered by a grassland species, colonize hedgerows. We looked at the factors that can explain the diversity of plants in hedgerows, and we found quite a lot of different factors. The first one being, and the less important being, the local hedgerow structure, the fact that you have a shrub layer, tree layer or not. Another important factor is the nature of the adjacent field. As we have seen before, it can explain the colonization by plant species. But the most important factor is the landscape context, which means the quality of the hedgerow network. Is it dense or sparse? And another important point, of course, is the type of farmer, the type of farming system he decided to do in this landscape. Biodiversity of the hedgerow is also linked to the management of the hedgerow, the way the farmers used to manage the vegetation of hedgerow. So for the management of the herbaceous layer, you may have mowing, like on the left, you may have trampling, grazing, use of herbicide. And when looking at the relationship between hedgerow management and adjacent land use, it maybe we showed that if hedgerows are bordered by temporary grassland or permanent grassland, it's mainly grazing that is used by the farmers, while when it is bordered by crops, being cereals or maize, it's mainly herbicide. And this survey was done 20 years ago. Now herbicide is not used anymore, but it's mainly mowing. For the management of the tree layer, it's really used to the uses of the wood that is done in each region. And for example, here you have what is done in the Rennes area, where the branches belong to the farmers and the trunk to the owners. And so the branches were cut all along the trunks every 9 to 12 years, and with different types of equipment, as you can see here. This is really a characteristic of the natural network of one area. And in other areas, you have also other uses, as for example, the pollarded of iron trees in northeast France. Another important point to explain the vegetation diversity of hedgerows is to look at the farming system. And here we compared in blue the species diversity of plants in conventional agriculture, while in beige you have in brown, you have the species diversity in organic agriculture, which is higher than in the precedent farming system. And this can be explained by the fact that in organic farming system, the community of weeds is rich and abundant and can disperse towards the hedgerows. But something which is important and that we realized a long time ago is that the biodiversity in the hedgerow network does not depend only on the quality and nature of the single hedgerow, but on the fact that this hedgerow is included in a network of different hedgerows that are connected to each other. And for that, we first compared different landscapes in northern Brittany, going from landscape units with around 100 meters per hectare of hedgerows toward landscape unit with only 50 meters per hectare of hedgerows. And when we looked at the differences in the communities in this along this gradient of landscape units, we realized that for some groups of species, mainly Diptera, there is a loss of species going from dense hedgerow network to more open ones. For some species like the Carabid beetles, there is about no difference in the number of species, but it's a difference in the nature of the species present. There is a replacement of species. And for some other, like small mammals and nesting birds, there are about no differences, neither in the number of species or in the nature of the species present. To explain this, we looked at the species, at some species of Diptera, and this is the case of an Amphididae species from the Ilaria genus. And you may see that in this slide that they use different landscape elements to fulfill their life cycle. They use open water for males to swarm. They use vertical vegetation structure for females to swarm and for fecundation. And then they use non-disturbed soils for the development of the larvae. So the individuals of this species need these three elements of the landscapes to fulfill their life cycle. And if these three elements are distant from each other, which is the case when hedgerows are removed from the landscape, the small species with small wings cannot reach the different landscape elements they need. So they disappear from the landscape. And in dense hedgerow landscape, you have small species and all other species. And in sparse hedgerow landscape, these small species disappear. For the Caribbean species, and you have here three different landscapes, from landscape A with dense hedgerow network to landscape C with a sparse hedgerow network. In landscape A, in the hedgerows of landscape A, most of the species are, as you see in green in the circle here, forest species, while in landscape C, even if you get a hedgerow with dense vegetation, most of the species are open species or crop species. So there is a shift in the nature of species from landscape A to landscape C. And in open landscapes, we have mainly species which fly and reproduce in spring, while in fine-grained hedgerow network landscape, species walk and reproduce in autumn, and these are mainly forest species. If we look now at the group of species that do not vary along the gradient of opening of the landscape, we looked at we sampled small mammals in dense and more open landscape, and the more open landscape adjacent to the hedgerow network landscape was the polder area. We found that the species were of rodents and insectivorous small mammals was the same in the three landscapes. But we showed that the Shannon diversity and insect index, so the diversity of species was lower in the polder area, with increasing importance of one species of crop area. If we look now at the biomass of the small mammals in hedgerows, we found that at the scale of the at the level of a single hedgerow, the biomass were more important in the polder, while at the landscape scale, the biomass was much higher in the dense hedgerow network than in the intermediate one and than in the polder. And looking at the physiology of species, we found also that there are differences according to the structure of the landscape. And for parasitoids, for example, we showed that as in the open landscape, extreme temperatures are more contrasted than in fine-grained landscapes. The parasitoids from open landscape are more thermotolerant with higher physiological costs, while those in fine-grained landscapes are less thermotolerant. And looking at the factors that explain biodiversity, it's important to realize that not only the semi-natural areas are important, but also what is present in the field mosaic. And for example, you have here for bees positive correlation of the number of species with the quantity of semi-natural habitats, while for bugs, the number of species increases with the diversity of crops. But one has to realize that for biodiversity, the movement is important in landscapes, and that species do not move at random. For example, here for this species of carabies, Abax parallelepipedus, you have metapopulation, which means that a small local population are installed in woodlots and some intersection of hedgerows. And as this population are submitted to extension, you have individuals which recognize extinct population, and they use hedgerows as corridors of dispersal. The efficiency of the hedgerows as corridor of dispersal depends upon the structure of their vegetation. The movements are slow and not very important when you have a sparse vegetation. They are more important when you have a dense vegetation, and are even more important when you have a green lane, which means a lane bordered by two parallel hedgerows. And for these movements, it's important also to realize that connectivity between hedgerows is important to ensure this kind of movement. And the green lanes are really key elements of our landscapes, because you can find in them a high abundance of forest species. They act as corridors and favor movement, and they have a positive role on population dynamics. But it's important also to realize that the same hedgerows are barriers for some butterfly species. And for example, for this blue butterfly, Lysandra belargus, for which even low hedgerows are obstacles. One thing is important also, as we have a dynamic landscape with the disappearance of hedgerows, as you have here in this area between 1947 and 2003, that the presence of species in hedgerows may be the resultant of colonization a long time ago, and the distribution of this species, Osmoderma eremita, is more important when the hedgerow network was done some decades ago. Now, looking at the role of biodiversity in this agro-ecosystem, we look first at the pollination service, which is done mainly by bees, on which you have social species, but also solitary species with more than 800 species in France. Those species are soil nesting, small size, and highly specialized. And we have shown that there is a positive role of the hedgerow network densities on bee species richness, which is shown here by a comparison of different landscape units, from fine-grained landscapes to coarse-grained landscapes, the grain of the landscape being the size of the average match of crops of grassland surrounded by hedgerows. And you may see on these graphs that the number of species of solitary bees decreases as you go from fine-grained landscape to coarse-grained landscape. The landscape structure has also a role on the service of biological control of herbivores by parasitoids or predators. It has been shown, for example, that going from a landscape with a high proportion of non-crop areas to landscapes, more open landscape, that the number of species of predators such as carabids, sylphids, and spiders increases when you increase the percentage of semi-natural elements in the landscape. Looking at parasitoids now, this is work by Teagasc and collaborators, and they have shown that when you look at oilseed rape production, the main enemy is the Meligetes eneus, which is parasitized by two parasitoids, Tersilochus heterocerus and Phragis interstitialis. And when you look at the rate of herbivory, so the rate of the importance of the damages by the Meligetes, that the rate of herbivory decreases while the non-crop area increases. That the total parasitism by the two species of parasitoids increases while the non-crop area increases. And that the population of these two parasitoids increase when the non-crop area increases. And this is due to the fact that the parasitoid species find resources in non-crop areas which permit to increase their population. Another example of biological at the landscape level is the planting of diverse hedgerows in southeastern France to control pear psyllid, which makes important economical damages to the production of pear fruits. Plant diverse hedgerows are planted around pear orchards to favor the development of beneficial insects which impact pests, and the diversity of plant species attract diversified and active beneficial impact. And for this, the farmers do not have to fulfill these elements. First, do not use species that cause diseases or crop pests. Plant resource species which are able to host or feed beneficial, which can be flowering trees which provide food to insects, or evergreen species which provide winter shelters. And then to provide all year long a continuous succession of habitat and food species. These practices are done by many peer fruit producers in this area. Another ecosystem service is wood production for poles, timber, firewood. The production of fodder, which is done all over the world, from Ecuador here to the central part of France. Another ecosystem service which is well known is the windbreak service. Here you have a windbreak in Hungary, where they have been planted to protect crops. Another example, another ecosystem service is the regulation of water fluxes with a network of ditches which are adjacent to hedgerows. Related to this control of water fluxes, there is a role as erosion control with mainly hedgerows perpendicular to the slope, which stop the fluxes of particles of soil. And also a role on the control of water quality, as for here for nitrates in Brittany, which is a very important environmental problem. We have shown that watersheds with a lot of buffer zone of semi-natural areas and mainly hedgerows, the quantity of nitrate is at the exit of the watershed is lower when you have, as in A, a lot of buffer zone than in watershed N, when you have only a few hedgerows and a few buffer zones. With all these elements, with all this knowledge on hedgerows, some policies have been implemented in Europe to favor biodiversity in hedgerow network landscapes. And this is the case of the areas of ecological compensation that are implemented in Switzerland. And there have been a survey of the effect of this area of ecological compensation 5 years after their implementation. And what was surveyed was the butterflies community. And the authors have shown that the butterflies communities benefit from ecological compensation areas. These ecological compensation areas being grassy strips, mainly grassy strips and hedgerows, that the specialized species and threatened species of butterflies, like this species of Carcharodus alcea, are favored. And another point which is important, and what we have seen for the movement of species, is the location, the place in the landscape is important. And what is important is the connectivity to other semi-natural areas to permit the colonization of these new planted semi-natural areas. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Françoise. We have a good number of questions coming in there, and just to put your questions for Françoise in the Q&A. I suppose a couple of things that strikes me is the very broad range of ecosystem services that are being delivered by the hedgerows, and I suppose one question is there a growing realization in France of the importance, or is that something that you're only just beginning to get across to people at this point? Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
No, I'm Jacques Baudry.
Good morning. You're welcome. No, I suppose in Ireland, we now have a growing realization amongst farmers and amongst policymakers of the importance of hedgerows. Is that realization beginning to happen in France as well?
Yes.
Yes. Well, since some time now, yes. Especially for well, it depends in the areas, but for instance, in Brittany, the control of water fluxes is of importance now for several decades. Biodiversity came later, and but windbreaks and new hedgerows have been planted since the 1970s.
Okay. Catherine, do you want to?
And perhaps I can introduce, I recognize him, Jack Baldry, another expert in hedgerows there, a unique pair. So you're welcome, Jack, and please stay with us. Yeah, we get double the value, Pat, for what is
absolutely.
Yeah. There's a number of questions relating to Ireland, but I'll go back to, I'll ask the ones relevant to Françoise and Jack first. A comment and a question. The very striking removal rates for hedges in France unfortunately mirror very high ongoing removal in Ireland. Estimates vary from 2,000 to 6,000 kilometres per year, an extraordinary figure. Question for the French people: what measures are being adopted to try to counteract removal at the moment in France?
Well, the key measure is within the urban planning. The municipalities have to plan for land use where to build houses, and within that, well, we have a policy of blue and green infrastructure within this urban planning, and so hedgerows can be protected as key elements, but also most of the municipalities have a provision where if farmers want to remove hedgerows, they have to ask permission. So there are discussion, and they can be allowed to remove hedgerows, but they have to replant somewhere else.
Sure.
And most of the time they have to plant twice the length they remove.
Okay.
And even I know a municipality where they want to go up to 3 times if the removal take place in an area where the hedgerows are very few. The problem is then to enforce this policy, because it's not very easy. But it's really coming now, and farmers are aware of that, and there's also the fact that for farmers, they want to improve their image.
So very similar to here, I think, is the answer. A question. I'll read the comment first. In terms of management, coppicing, and by coppicing we mean cutting off at the butt, will be part of our new acres agri-environment scheme, with a payment for up to 400 meters per farm. Would you, and obviously that's kind of dramatic for a few years, albeit, you know, a good hedge ensues after a few years. But it's just, the question is, could you comment on, is it wiser for the length of hedgerow to be coppiced to be a percentage of the farm's total length of hedgerow, rather than a set amount that anybody can do?
Yes, I think that would be a good point, to have a percentage of the length of the farm. Yeah. Especially
possibly at the one time. You know, yeah. But obviously that can be difficult within schemes. But as a principle, that's a good principle. Yeah. Okay. As a response to ash dieback, would pollarding of ash help to reduce tree removal from Irish hedgerows and buy time for some mature trees? Ash dieback, any comments on how to manage that in hedges?
No, we not so
much on that. That's fine.
We have very few networks where ashes are dominant. We had mostly ash trees around the farms because it was a fodder, but we don't have large extent of.
So not as big an issue as for us. What about rights of way in France? You showed some lovely, green corridors there, but are these do they have extra protection? Which for the hedgerows, no, where they are rights of way, of public, through the countryside. Okay, that's fine. What do we see? In your view, in your expert view, how long do you estimate it takes a newly planted hedge to replace the biodiversity and carbon, if you know a value of an old hedge? So new versus old. How long?
It depends on what you are interested in. We looked at the colonization of new planted hedgerows by carbide beetles, and we found that after just a few years, maybe 5 to 10 years, forest carbide beetles are able to colonize the new planted hedgerows. But if they are connected to woodlot or another old hedgerow, and if you are interested in holes in trees, it may last for a few decades.
Okay, so it varies with what you're talking about. Regarding the green lanes, how far apart, would the hedges need to be, or how near, or how close to get the optimal effect? How wide or how narrow can a green lane be to have that superb value that you spoke about?
We didn't look at it very closely, but I think that 10 meters is okay.
Yeah, brilliant. Are older hedges given greater recognition?
No. Not in France, no.
Great to see scientific results to back up the importance of hedges for biodiversity and agriculture, and I totally reiterate that. I think it's fantastic hearing from you, because everything you say applies to our area. Coming back to some Irish questions, have you got a comment in the meantime, Pat, while I...
Yeah, no, I suppose just in terms of the planting of hedgerows, in terms of trying to, where new hedgerows are being planted, is there a high diversity of species being put into those hedgerows, or do they tend to be more monocultural, and what's the advantages in highly diverse and maybe more monoculture?
It depends on the objectives of the plantation. When it's mainly for firewood, it's most of the time a monoculture of coppice, and in our area it's coppice chestnut. But when it's for windbreak and biodiversity, that's a diversity of trees and shrubs which are planted.
But the problem is it's very difficult to manage a diversity of trees because you have a competition in the first years. And for example, you have birches that can overgrow oaks. So you have to keep the balance, and because in the past, the past hedgerows were mostly one dominant species and shrubs and few other.
And what was that dominant species, Jack? What is the main species in the hedges in France?
Oaks, chestnut.
Ironwood.
What about whitethorn, hawthorn, Teagasc, Managaiga?
Yes, in some areas.
Not everywhere.
Not everywhere.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's mostly in areas where hedgerows are trimmed on three faces, as they say. And it can be also Prunus spinosa, and but other trees are like Prunus cerasus, or elm disappeared, and what else as a dominant species? In some area, beech is in wet, where the atmospheric humidity is high. You can have beech as the fagus as a hedgerows. And
a question on, are there any cases where hedges actually represent reservoir for pests, such as leather jackets, rather than having a role in biological control by hosting parasitoids and other beneficial insects? So is there bad as well as the good when it comes to insects from an agricultural point of view, I suppose?
Yes, that's right, yeah. And it's not easy to assess the balance between bad and good qualities of hedgerows, but mostly there are one thing is important, that in hedgerow network landscape, the damages by the insects are lower than in open landscapes.
Overall. And for instance, aphids in hedgerows are not the same as in fields, because they are because fields that's herbaceous plants. That's not woody plants, so that's you have mostly weeds that can move from big, especially when farmers used a lot of herbicides. Weeds invade from the fields, and then they were sourced for colonizing the field afterwards. So that's something.
And I presume, Jack, that happens or has happened in the past where they were sprayed, where herbicides were used. It was an open area for things to take root, wasn't it? Where herbicide was used as a management tool of the vegetation along the hedge. That causes more problems, doesn't it? Would you?
But glyphosate is banned since 20 years in Brittany.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was heavily used in the 80s, 90s.
I suppose one of the attributes that there's concern about in terms of the promoting of particularly pollinator, but other, I suppose, insect species, is a continuity of seed sources throughout the year. And is there any management of the, I suppose, the colony of hedgerows to try and make sure that that's happening, or do they tend to be very, very similar? If you understand what I'm saying, that
there is no, I don't know of any specific management to maintain food for instance, for bees. That can be a problem. Yes, that's right. Because, no, there is no specific policy or.
And I suppose you mentioned that it's the municipalities have a role in terms of the preservation of hedgerows. Are you finding that people in general and I suppose that the broader community are taking more of an interest in hedgerows and the management of areas? I suppose in Ireland we have groups around towns. We tend to have tidy towns groups who are beginning to take more of an interest in managing areas for biodiversity. Is there an equivalent of that in France?
Not for the moment, no.
No.
Okay.
Because city dwellers like hedgerows, but they're not involved in doing anything for the protection or the management. The only thing that is really developing is that you have kind of cooperatives for firewood production, where of course farmers are the producers, the city dwellers can be the consumers, and there are special plans to maintain biodiversity while producing firewood. Because the big problem with firewood is you have sometimes companies coming and cutting everything, and so you lose a lot of services. So now that these groups are developing in France.
Okay. And did I hear you correctly when did you say that the trunk of the trees belong to the landowner and the branches of the tree? That sounds absolutely bizarre.
That's right.
So the person renting the land has the right to take off the branches of the tree for firewood or whatever. Yeah.
No, it was much regulated. It was once during a lease period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not every year. Yeah.
Otherwise, the farmers had no access to the wood.
Okay.
And related question, Pat, if they are taken off and that kind of, how important do you consider the structure of the hedge in terms of having, a well-developed tree layer and good diversity in the shrub layer? Just speak about the different layers or the overall value.
This is important. And now there is in France a label that is called label A, hedgerow, and where they assess, they have many criteria, and it's now it's recognized by both the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, and there is a national database for that, and so and when farmers apply to get the label, they have also advices to have a better management over a period of 5 years to achieve certain goals in terms of hedgerow structure. So this is new, but more and more.
And to get the top quality, what type of a hedge is it?
Well, you know, you need to have the 3 layers and the
yeah.
large canopy, and well, something we all know for years, but it's all details and.
Yeah, sorry, Pat, go on.
Sorry, no, just to what extent are farmers beginning to realize that the hedgerows are part of an integrated pest management process?
I think that it's mainly important for organic producers, and that they are now implemented also to flowering strips in the landscape. And this is, I think, of growing importance in France, at least.
Okay.
Even if it's still marginal.
Okay, and and I suppose it's a symbiotic relationship there for organic farmers, because you're seeing evidence of organic farms having a higher diversity, and then that higher diversity helping them to manage the harmful pests in their crops.
Yeah,
a circular process. Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, fascinating presentation. Mercy. From people here. A lot of people, I'm amazed at how similar it is to Ireland, and very interested in your work and asking for more references. So I know perhaps I can undertake to any of the papers that you have to put them on the Teagasc website alongside this webinar. If that's okay, you can send me on any ones I don't have. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So I'll undertake to do that. So again, just to remind everybody that this webinar is recorded. So the recording and the slides will be on the Teagasc website under the Signpost webinar, and then I will add any references in as well to that, because I think that it's striking that we haven't had more contact over the years. It's just evolving, I suppose, the importance of hedges in both countries, and it would be really good to work together, I think, Pat, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, and I see a question in there as well in looking at the effect of combining hedgerows with wider field margins, and what is the combined effect of both.
Does the additional field margin, which is part of our new acres scheme, is that, how much does that add to the hedgerow, having a grassy margin alongside? Is that very important?
Yes, it's very important. In most of the implementation now is implement the hedgerow and the field margin.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're all getting our new CAP review. Are you seeing in France reflected in your CAP review an increased emphasis on hedgerows, or is it similar?
Yes, it has been a matter of discussion, but first we worked with an association in charge of hedgerows in France. So we wrote an opinion paper in the journal Le Monde, which is the top reference, and we had a signature of 700 researchers in over a week.
Okay.
So it has some weight in the discussion where we emphasize really the importance of hedgerows and field margins. And so the ministry couldn't say that, well, blah, 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 because we wanted only signature from scientists, not everybody, because we could have more. But to say that these people are involved in science, and it's important. No.
Pat, can I just ask one? I'm very interested myself. Have you any research, or how do you answer people who worry about the shadowing, casting a shadow on crops, as and competition for moisture? That may not be such an issue for us, or it may be, but again, counteracting the negative arguments, have you any evidence to say how much it affects? We need to acknowledge it if it does. So shadowing and competition for moisture.
But the measure of that is very old now. The they don't. I don't know if any new work on that since the 70s. So it's really the cropping techniques have changed, and even this year with the drought, you see a positive effect of shadowing.
So it's the opposite to a problem. It's a possible opportunity. Okay. Listen, we're coming up on our hour. I really appreciate the insight you've given us. I think while there's a huge amount of similarities, there's a degree of difference there as well, particularly in the type of hedgerow, which seem to be more tree-based hedgerows rather than, I suppose, shrub-based hedgerows here. I think potentially we've a lot to learn from each other, and I hope this is, Catherine has been talking about having you on this series for a long time now, and it's great to have you both here, and hopefully this is the start of some cooperation, because I think there's probably a lot that we can learn from each other.
Yes, that would be nice.
So that's why we plan to visit you next year.
Yes, and we already have talked about maybe not letting that be a total holiday. We might get some work out of you during
Two
that
for the
period.
price of one again.
So that would be a great opportunity. So listen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Next week we're joined by Jack Nolan. Jack in a previous role has had the record for the highest attendance at one of our webinars, but tomorrow he's representing his changed role within the Department of Agriculture as leading in relation to organic farming. So he will be talking about the organic farming schemes and the changes coming down the line there. So that should be a really interesting session. I'd like to thank our production team of Yvonne Marr and Andy Boland. And until next week, enjoy, and maybe enjoy the little bit of rain that's coming, which will be very welcome for an awful lot of our viewers. So until then, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.